Hi, this is Laura from Healing with Spirit with your next episode of Triggers and Spiritual Medicine. We have an amazing guest today, Lolly. We're going to be addressing some really sensitive topics, but because again, hello, it is triggers and spiritual medicine. So yes, what my hope is that if you are triggered today, that you're triggered in the right direction on helping you to unpack maybe things that could be triggering the root issues that are causing the disharmony. But we're going to also offer you some valuable tips and spiritual medicine through the day. Because triggers and spiritual medicine, this is where we turn our triggers into a superpower and we reclaim our lives. In this podcast, we address the elephant in the room of what is making our society sick. We can all agree that our society is not getting healthier by the day. It is getting sicker. So we hope by addressing the intersectionality and connecting the dots like a web, we can help you to provide and help you to show the patterns that might be making you sick so you can reclaim your life. Whether it's, racism, homelessness, domestic violence, cancer, chronic illness, there usually is a thread that ties and binds it all. So I am so excited to have Lolly here because she's, first of all, she's like the epitome of tying all I just said in that. And on top of that, she has a degree in psychotherapy and a beautiful, I'm actually going to have you do your own introduction, but we're going to go into some really deep topics. So please listen, because this is going to be the medicine the world is going to need right here, right now.
Awesome. Hi, my name is Lolly B. I'm a reconnecting Indigenous person born in Colombia, raised in Connecticut. I have a social worker by training. I was a traveler for 10 years. I was a activist, primarily working with Native Americans in the Northern Plains, the Lakota, and the Southwest, the Dene, working against the pipeline, fighting for the water and the climate, and then doing mutual aid activism for many years after that. Working with people migrating across the made-up border, and the line we draw between Mexico and the United States. And I also have worked as a merchant, bringing textiles and artesanía from different countries and selling them here in the U.S. So I've really been around a lot of different cultures, different class, different like communities of all kinds and all different ways around the world, around Turtle Island. And and then I work with people primarily on recovery from abusive relationships. Myself, I'm a twice survivor. So that's a bit about myself. Glad to be here.
I'm glad you're here. So tell me, what drew you to actually go to college with all of that you just said you do, right?
Hmm.
And say, you know what? I'm still going to an American college that's very male dominated in a field that is very male dominated. Okay. Even the teachings and everything else to go and say, I'm going to go into psychiatry.
Yeah, well, so social work is what my training is in more specifically, but mainly like I was raised primarily with academia. So as growing up, there was not really any spirituality. It was like we know science. I was raised right next to like a world-renowned university, so that was the narrative, like learning, education, science. And so then I was always into service work and community organizing. But it was actually when I went through an abusive relationship when I was 18 years old. And then I developed post-traumatic stress disorder from that. But at that moment in time, nobody was really talking about the fact that you could develop PTS from a relationship. That was brand new to me. I was so fascinated by how much I had changed based on what like I thought was love. What I thought was, my first serious boyfriend. And then I realized that I had become just a shadow of my former self. There was like the light had gone out of me. And so I was raised, my father works in mental health as well. And so I was really intrigued by it in as much as I was like hurt by it. So that's really what kept me. So, first of all, I did sociology undergrad. And I studied a lot about the education system. And I really wanted to change the education system. And then someone said to me, I think it was like my fourth year in school, they know that it's incredibly unequal and this is done on purpose. And that was like a turning point for me. And then I went on to get my degree in social work because I knew that I wanted to work with other people that had been through this phenomenon of relationships causing a huge amount of mental distress, despair, depression, heaviness, And so those things combined led me to really look at the fabric of society in a more questioning way, like, oh, some of these systems that exist that were being taught to me as the way things are, the way things have been, the way things will be, are extremely problematic, unequal, and not actually trying to make any change or anything better. And so that's kind of what pushed me into the path of activism, of saying, okay, I need to resist some of what's being told to me as true, because as you said, this society is not working as it stands. There's a huge amount of suffering, and it's really unnecessary. It does not have to be this way. It isn't because of scarcity. It's done on purpose. And that was like a real turning point for me in my life.
Yeah, I think for me, I grew up in a family of doctors and nurses, but the doctors were trained in osteopathic medicine. So they blended Eastern therapies and Western
Mm,
science. And
mm,
so I was always taught, and as well as I had the generational healing lineage as well on my dad's side. So, watching him combat the system as an osteopath while addressing root issues and systems of change, and he actually helped get osteopathic medicine listed or recognized in the state of Massachusetts as a viable form of healthcare back in the 80s. I go, my introverted dad did that,
oh,
like,
that's amazing.
and he ended up getting to be the first osteopath on the staff of one of the hospitals here in Boston in the 1980s too. So, you know, but then it became a problem because again, he was up against people with the MD background
Mm,
with, and I remember him saying like, I'm board certified, this. And the guy goes, well, I'm board certified 10 times. He goes, well, I'm board certified once. Isn't that all that matters? And it's like, it became like this, all over trying to save somebody's foot. The guy wanted to make money on it and amputate it. My dad's sitting there going like, look, I made the same amount of money, but it took me 13 weeks, which you would have done in 20 minutes. And the
mm,
guy still can walk without disability,
wow.
And so this is like, I get it. And I know like when I finally was met with my last abuser, I saw like a clear divide in who I was.
Mm,
And when I had to deal with him, and it really was an awakener when I dealt with family courts because
mm,
I was raised being the oldest that I was equal to men. I had a
mm,
false safety net thinking that I was just as equal. I could do just as much as men can do.
mm,
And until I dealt with family court. And to really see the wool come down and be like, when you're trying to protect and save your children, and to see the level of corruption and the stuff that you usually would only see like in a Michael Crichton novel or Hollywood movie.
mm,
And then
mm,
you start listening to folks, especially of color or immigrants and stuff, and you start hearing that they've been dealing with that for a longer time.
mm,
And so I started seeing a lot of the parallels of what what I saw as a survivor of abuse with systemic oppression is what folks of color and immigration had, what they experienced. But I also got to say, like, as a white woman, it became very lonely because white women don't stick together. There's no community, there's no underpinning to hold them together.
mm,
They're taught to fight, compete, and you're not my like, there's like this underpinning that goes for like 600 years since the burning times of witches of selling your
mm,
sisters out to
mm,
align with the
mhm,
oppressive system.
yeah.
And I always mourned over that because when I saw my friends and sisters of color or my partner who's also an immigrant and seeing him even with the immigrant community from Ireland, you don't even have to know somebody. The communities come together at a dime. And
Yeah.
I go, why is that? Like, why can't we get our, like, what is it like that we are missing? And so it's been like a 20-year process. But one of the things I have found, especially if you are a white woman and you resonate with some of what I'm saying, is what I that has led me to doing some of the decolonizing work, that has
Mm,
led me to unpacking my inner misogyny, my inner racism, my inner all that stuff that I have been conditioned and taught. being as a privileged person. And it opened my lens to deeper things and to see the world through a different lens. And it also helped me heal my own PTSD
Mm.
and get me off of all the 10 different medications they had me on initially. And I'm
Mm.
on none now. So there is a way, but doing the lens through the lens that you're talking about to me, it's like you can't heal from like depression, anxiety when we don't address the root issues, whether it's root systems or root issues, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that that's sort of how I approach the concepts of illness and wellness now. Like the Western modality is, and the culture of whiteness is very individual. So it says if something is wrong with you, if you are not feeling well, then the entire answer and solution is also having to do with you. And there's no acknowledgement that we exist in systems, with systems of oppression. That's part of the reason I chose social work over some other mental health disciplines, because there is at least an acknowledgement that we existed in systems, our cultures, our families, the neighborhood you live in, the part of the country you live in. Like we acknowledge that we're not completely solitary. But the indigenous approach to wellness and illness, it's so communal. It's like we are part of a village, right? Whether or not we live that way anymore, like we are part of a subculture, different communities, different ways of life. And if one of us is sick, then like we should all attend to that. It's not like a private problem that you go and deal with largely in silence still in this society, right? It's like kind of hush hush. That person has a mental health issue and it's something to be ashamed about and to sweep under the rug and hide away, versus saying if someone is unwell, actually like they need to be invited into the community and the community needs to acknowledge that this person needs help, needs support, needs guidance. And
Mhm.
so I think that that's what I learned, like being in the activism scene, living in activism camps. Like it was very chaotic, very difficult. And there was this incredible village that showed up, this team, the support network, right? Where like people arriving to some of those activism camps, it didn't matter who you were. If you showed up and you were willing to stand for the people, for the water, for human rights, then you would be fed, you would be clothed, you would be sheltered, right? It was just like a given. And it was so healing. And I watched people sit around the fire and say, I don't want to be addicted anymore. Like I'm giving up my addiction because now I belong and I have purpose. And I want to get up in the
Yeah.
morning and like work the security gate and make sure people are safe or chop wood for the elders. Like suddenly they
It's
weren't
amazing. It's
away.
amazing, right? I mean, I
Mhm.
interviewed, I think I mentioned before we got on that I interviewed a colleague of mine, Dr. Jessica Taylor, who, when she was working doing abuse recovery, for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, and she started recognizing a pattern of why is it that every victim of sexual assault, domestic violence was borderline personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, borderline personality disorder,
Mhm.
borderline personality disorder, when all they really needed was somebody to tend to the trauma, not label them or pathologize them as having mental illness. And I think that is what we have to really kind of shift. What you're talking about is shifting. Like people wouldn't be having or being labeled as mentally ill if there were pathways or the
Mhm.
root systems or root issues and their needs were being met. Right. I think that's
Mhm.
the old
Mhm.
ways, like the old indigenous ways, regardless of what culture you come from, is, we call that a spiritual crisis, right?
Mm,
Not a
mm,
mental illness. Mental illness
mm,
became this money making $1 billion, actually $1 trillion industry. I remember one of the trauma conferences I went to, and this was a huge awakener for me. I think it was like 8 or 9 years ago. And one of the experts put on, this is the date Prozac came on the market. This is how many sales were prescribed in this year. This is
mm,
how many sales were prescribed last year, showing the inclination in between of how many sales. Then they did another graph to show how many people had mental health disability in that same year Prozac came out,
mm,
to
mm,
how many now are being disabled or becoming increasingly disabled because of their psych meds. Because what they're really realizing is these psych meds alter brain chemistry when the trauma component is nervous system dysregulation. And when
mm,
you
mm,
have the medications now that are altering your brain chemistry. Now you become chemically dependent on these psych meds. So then what do you do when the meds don't work anymore? Now you got to add an antipsychotic. Well, what do you do when those meds don't work anymore? You add a third medication. And this is what they have learned to make $1 trillion industry on people's pain and suffering. And who suffer the most? Obviously, those that are in marginalized communities.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think like, and as we were saying too, like when I worked in a state mental health clinic affiliated with Yale University, I actually couldn't stand working there more than a whole year because there was no expectation of anyone ever becoming well. It was literally just a revolving door. It was just managing people at a very like low level of empowerment. They were extremely dependent. It was like keep them out of the hospital, keep them out of jail, and that's it. And they would just come in and leave, come in and leave. There was no like hope that they would heal. There was no it was like just this labeling, this kind of hierarchical, like almost these people are like a lost cause. These people are less than, they're broken, and obviously they can feel it. And it was like I was working in the Hispanic clinic, so it was a lot of folks coming in from other cultures, other countries, and then being told by this culture that because they weren't able to function, and the number one rule being be productive, right? AKA go to work, make money. That was the measurement that there was something wrong with them. When in actuality, like, back before this late stage of capitalism and corporatization of everything, work was something that people did like together. Everyone would go out and forage and cook and care for the kids all together. We were always with other people, and you
And
would do what you were good at, right? If you were good with the kids, fine. And then other people would feed you, and then someone else would, like keep you safe. And we all had a different role in society, and that worked. But now we
yeah,
have this individualized expectation that every person needs to go to work, provide for all of their own needs, their physical needs, their emotional needs, their spiritual needs, and like basically pay money in exchange for anything that they can't do themselves. And it's just completely fragmented us. And there's this epidemic of loneliness and
yeah,
sorrow. And then what does that lead to? Addiction, mindless consumption, like all these activities, because what we actually all want is human connection and a sense of
yeah.
belonging and purpose, and but
You're
the system
hitting
isn't designed for that.
you're hitting something like a huge chord, because like I know we just came back, as I mentioned before, I was from leading a pilgrimage in Ireland, and a lot of that was doing reclamation work and ancestral healing. But in order to access that, right, first of all, we got to ask permission. I think that's the other thing we forget as Americans is permissions, consent, and boundaries, like not
Mhm.
unhealthy boundaries, but healthy boundaries. That includes the spirit work too. And so, one of the things I find is like this romantic, this romanticism of like, even when we do this, oh, I can't wait to do that. And like escapism is like
Mhm.
all
Mhm.
Americans know how to do, because they're so constricted, or they've been conscribed to like work 60, 90 hours a week. And I just say, hey, go look at what the United Auto Workers Union are doing and pray they succeed, because they're
Mm.
fighting for right now a
Mm.
35-hour work week, if I'm
Mm.
correct. And I go, what would that do for your community and for your family structure if you have
Mm.
all those hours back to be able to
Right.
dedicate to things like the things you're talking about, so we can focus. You're not like an indentured servant to a company. And I think let's
Right.
just talk it for what it is. You're an
Yeah.
indentured servant to a corporation. You're
Mhm.
not free.
Mhm. Mm-mm. Yeah, especially with student debt, which was done expressly to quell the fact that it's usually the youth and the students that are rebelling, which we saw, right, in the student encampments for Gaza just recently, because students are one of the only populations of people that are not like selling every hour of their life away for a certain number of dollars in order to survive. And unfortunately, as soon as they graduate, they're going to be in debt. And it's done on purpose, because you can't go live in a protest camp if you have to pay thousands of dollars, especially for something you already learned, right? And you're not like any money that you make right now is just going in back into the corporations that like you're paying them off for the money that you're earning. There really is not much freedom. And so it's like this illusion, or I like this idea of like someone said, you can go in the grocery store and you can choose, 45 kinds of shampoos. And that's the kind of choice that capitalism has granted us. But do you have the choice of like what time you want to wake up in the morning and how you want to spend your day? Or is it you're like rushing out the door? I got the kids at 8 and get to work at 8, and I'm going to get in trouble if I don't. I'm going to get fired. I'm going to lose my health insurance if I don't go to work. Like I can't even take care of myself and my body.
I mean,
Also,
could we just like pause and just recognize that? Like, this is what enslavement looks like. Like, this is, I'm trying to stay away from it. It's like this is really more in indentured servitude because you are getting a paycheck, but it's like, this is what America has become. We are not the land of the free because if you're working like that, you are an indentured servant. You are tied and married to your job. You are not
yeah.
free.
You're controlled. We're so controlled, and then always by this authoritarian energy. Like I have a client who, like, it seems like everywhere that they work, someone who's their superior is disrespecting her, harassing her, like what, trying to frame that she's doing something wrong. Like, and she doesn't have power because she's young, she's new at the job, and she's just constantly being exploited. And she goes to a completely different field, and there it is again, just this utter
Yeah.
disrespect for your schedule. Oh, come in today, not tomorrow. And the next day we won't tell you your schedule. It's like so many people are so dependent on whoever is their superior. And then even the jobs that, do earn more money, like then you have more responsibility and you sell more of your life away. And you're not home. You're not there with your kids, with your dogs in the house that can barely afford in many cases. And so truly, I mean, I understand that there's like this movement. Some people are leaving the United States. Some people are, I was even reading this article today about this like trad wife movement, which is like very strange and patriarchal and antiquated in many ways. But the appeal is that you could just get up and, bake a pie, and that's all you have to worry about for the day. And that so many, especially like women, as we've reclaimed independence or claimed independence in the society, that we can even have a job that can support us, because that was not an option, what, 50 years ago. But at what cost? Because then people are leaving their babies to go to work and hiring someone else to watch their baby, and then somehow
And then
sometimes
and
end
that
up with no
and then
money.
well, but then can we even, because this is where I can loop back into like what we kind of started. Because when a woman's been told, yes, you can have a job and you can leave your child at 4 or 6 weeks, there is something that women aren't taught. Okay. They are not taught, because this is what I work with my clients all the time. And I had a client that I'm allowed to share some of this story. And she came to me with diagnosed at 30 with stage 4 breast cancer, told she would never have kids. Make a long story short, we did a lot of unpacking, a lot of healing, a lot of root systems work, changed the jobs like 3 times over, and taught her how to get her medical needs met.
Hmm.
Then last year, she was given the green light to try to have children. They decided to do implantation because of just the history and all these other things. So they did. And I said, oh, yeah, well, this one probably may not take, or this one didn't take. But in September, I don't know, I'm getting September and I did a Freudian slip saying multiples, not twins, multiples. She comes back in September, twins, and she delivered triplets, not twins. She had triplets. She delivered triplets a couple months ago.
Mm.
And the thing is like people couldn't understand how she was able to do it. And it's because she had to do a lot of unpacking. And not
Mm.
only that, but unpacking of understanding that her stress level, if
Mm.
it wasn't mitigated and she didn't learn how to work with her nervous system, her
Mm.
bodies, learning how to tap in, it was going to one, reignite the cancer. It was going to
Mm.
two, then she understood developmental trauma. And I think that's the one thing when women get pregnant, nobody talks about. They say, don't have Coca-Cola, don't
Mm.
drink alcohol, don't do drugs or smoke. Nobody doesn't talk about how, if you're on 10 antipsychotic medications, how your child is probably going to be born chemically dependent now.
Mm.
And it's a taboo topic, but it's how can mom get herself where she's well enough and understand that her stress level, her mental health impacts directly the health and well-being and attachment of that fetus. That the first 6 months of pregnancy, even afterwards, I mean, all the studies show with developmental trauma studies show it. It's just nobody really talks about it because, yes, it doesn't mean like you're a horrible human being. It doesn't mean, I think we have this misunderstanding about trauma. It could be that this is your life circumstance and it is survival for you.
Yeah.
It is pure
Mm-hmm.
survival. It doesn't mean that it's not traumatic. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
I think if we can start teaching young girls on how to carry children for the longevity of like sustainably, and why taking care of yourself instead of martyrdom, like women have been conditioned, martyrdom,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
understanding that their own well-being and how well they nurture their own temple is setting up the children for the best success they possibly could have. And that the attachment, we have a non-attached, hyper individualized system because of what the government said. Let your babies cry in the crib. Don't coddle them. Don't hold them. Don't let them sleep in your bed. And now they got studies coming out of Japan, which I found this was interesting when I was learning this a few years ago, on the attachment theory and the attachment disorders, on how that shows up on children when they become teenagers or adults, and then having attachment issues with people and so-called
Mm-hmm.
mental illness. And they don't know how to function and
Yeah.
be in communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that just makes me think so much about like there's this phrase in mental health where it says the opposite of addiction is connection. And how like truly, I mean, that's what I think so many of these like conscious festivals and these like people on the medicine path, like what we're really deeply seeking is connection. And that like that, baby to parent is like the most deep connection that we have until we grow up and maybe have a romantic connection or like a long lifelong friendship connection or like yeah, a provider and their client connection. It's really what we're seeking because only when we can see and be seen do we get that nervous system regulation. Do we feel safe? Do we feel loved as we are? Instead, we have a society that's constantly telling us, like, change this about yourself. This isn't good enough. Change that. Change how you look. Change how you act. Change how you talk. Like, in order to get a mate or be accepted, to get someone to like you. But if you're conforming to being a certain way that is not your truth in order to be liked, then you are sacrificing your liking yourself for the sake of other people liking you. And eventually, those relationships will not be fulfilling or nourishing or sustainable. And yet, the fear of being alone sometimes will keep people in very dysfunctional situations because, we understand if you didn't have that feeling of connection growing up, then yeah, being alone can be really scary. But I think it's important to remember, and I tell this to my clients a lot who are recovering from abusive relationships of all kinds, that you'll never be more alone than in a relationship that isn't working. That's what my uncle taught me. He was like in his 70s. He had been married 3 times for 10 years each. And he chose to not engage in another relationship toward the end of his life and found spirituality, found community. And I think that's so important is that really we need to find not just one individual, right? Not just a spouse or just a partner to share vulnerability, authenticity with, not just your therapist who you pay to share that with. Like we
Right.
all are seeking that sense of connection, camaraderie, companionship, because that it's good for our mental health. Like it's good for our well-being to be able to be real with one another, to be able to share our full story, not just be like, I'm fine, you're fine, everybody's fine, nobody's talking about anything authentic.
Right.
Like no wonder then some people turn to drinking, drugs, whatever it is, because like they're trying to bottle it all up inside. And I think there's such a movement now finally emerging for spaces where people are invited and welcome to share their truth, to actually be real. And I think that when we witness someone doing that and not being ashamed and even allowing if they are shunned or people fall away from their life and saying, I'm still going to stand in my truth, then that creates a kind of permission for others to say, okay, yeah, I want a real connection or nothing at all because that is what's going to help me feel better in my life.
And I think what you're sharing is something I use the three-legged stool analogy. If we represent each of us like a three-legged stool, and you're trying to fix something, right? My depression, my disharmony, my addiction, right? Whatever it is, if you're addressing it in the physical body being one leg, or the mental emotional body in the other leg, or the spiritual body, but you're not addressing all three, and usually it's the spiritual
Mm.
body is the one that typically is lagging. That's my specialty. But you cannot become whole unless all
Mm.
three bodies are addressed and healed.
Mhm.
And as I learned from my Japanese teachers, they're all independent of each other, yet interdependent of each other. Just like your
Mm.
inner organs, they work independently, but yet interdependently of each other. So
Mm.
they have their own community of organs, right? You have your community here within the body systems. Now we just have to bring it out here. And how do we integrate that and go into a deep remembering? And yeah, there might be some grief, right? And grieving over the life that you thought you had, to grieve
Mm.
over the falsities that you just learned, right? Those hard truths, in
Mhm.
order to actually reclaim some of the magic and some of the powers that were either lost or stolen from you and your ancestors, regardless
Mm.
of your lineage. So my
Mhm.
question to you leading up to that is, what would be the top three things, especially if you're talking to people who might be new and understanding, whether it's a white person that's trying to understand the link of, unpacking colonizer mindset and that type of stuff to heal their mental illness, or somebody who's indigenous, understanding the other aspects, right? What would it be? Or maybe they're just new to even a spiritual path. And I have no idea what the fuck this shit's about. Like, but I'm just here because something's telling me I need to be here, right? So,
Mm.
what would be the top three things that you would say to people to help them that they could do now today? What would you say would be the top three things?
Yeah, the first one that comes to mind is the fact that sometimes human connections can be challenging, as we said, trauma, indoctrination, different kinds of like mind control. So I wouldn't even start trying to seek deep connection with people. I would start by connecting to the earth. Every single one of us can go out to the forest, to a body of water, and start to kind of release some of the masks that you wear in society and all the roles that you have, and just sit and be quiet in nature. And sometimes, like, these narratives will run in our head, like, this is silly. Oh, what am I doing? This is weird. This is like a Disney movie, right? And that's all done on purpose to disconnect us from the fact that we all have an inherent right to connect with nature,
But there's
with the
also
power of the
science
earth.
behind it. Like, there's science actually in
Yeah.
Japan, they have called Shinrin Yoku. They actually have science that shows that it actually helps you re-regulate your nervous system.
Yeah,
So
and I just heard recently that one of the reasons that we love to hear the birds sing and it brings us such peace is because when we were all living outside in the forest, if a predator is nearby, there's a bear, there's a lion, the birds get quiet. And that's a
mm,
warning to us that we're not safe. So when we hear the birds singing, it literally makes us feel safe. It makes us feel connected. It reminds us that we're part of this earth and this nature. So I would start with that sense of connection with nature and just really like I highly recommend going alone into nature. It can be nice walk with a friend, but then you're talking, and you're in that
yeah,
world.
yeah.
You're in the world of
You're
words.
not,
So
you're,
I
you're not
highly
present. You're not
recommend.
present.
Yeah, like going and just sitting in nature. You don't have to like do a meditation per se, but you just get quiet in nature and that will start to give you more of the sense of connection. You'll start to kind of hear and see yourself in a different way. So I think that that's really important. Then the next one I would say, like I read recently, or no, I was listening to this presentation about climate change, climate crisis, and mental health. And it was talking about how when we are like worrying, when we're in that like panic energy, like doom, it lights up one part of our brain. It kind of just feeds itself, like more worry, more anxiety. But when we link ourselves to something bigger than ourselves, and especially to other people that are also working for something bigger than ourselves, even though the problem is still huge and way bigger than us, when you are engaging with other people trying to make things better, it literally activates a different part of your brain. So whether that's like going and doing a beach cleanup with some people and you're all picking up the garbage together, is that going to like, make a dent in the plastic pollution on the earth? Maybe not, but you will literally feel better. Go
Well,
and
if
work at a
everybody did a little bit,
absolutely. And
you know,
there's pictures of that, of like entire beaches that have been cleaned up by hundreds and hundreds of volunteers. But anything like that where we can be in service and we can be in something bigger than ourselves. And then also making a difference, right? Maybe we can't all like stop the genocide in Gaza right now, but we can go and help a hungry person in your town. You can, go out of your way to just have that sense that your existence is helping another, right? Maybe it's like picking up a snake and moving it to the other side of the road if it's a safe snake, so that it doesn't get run over. Just any way that we remember that we can contribute to anyone that is beyond ourselves actually makes us feel better and brings us out of that state of helplessness. So that's a really great opportunity. And then I think more than anything as well, I would say try to interact with people that are different than yourself, whether it's at a store, whether it's at the park. Like a lot of times the society is so segregated, so insular by class, culture, race, religion. When you get to have a human connection, go to a grocery store that specializes in a different culture other than your own. Chat with the people there. Ask about a product that you're not familiar with. Just really like opening up the fact that, to remember that the world that you know and that you were raised in, that's presented to you as life on earth, is not the only way to live on earth. And all of these social norms are fabricated. And in a different culture, there's a completely way of being a human. And I think that is a real growth edge. And if more people did that, we would just all be able to understand one another more on a human level.
I think it's like I use the analogy of please bring out your curious, 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old inner self, because they're the ones going to be like, well, why do you wear that? How come you do that? Why is this purple in this place? Like, it's like, but you got to ask, but you also have to be curious enough to listen. Don't try to interject. Like, if you're trying to listen, if you're trying to really grow and extend that list, I'm speaking especially to the white folks out here that might be listening, try to stretch the lens of not interjecting belief systems that come from a culture of oppression that you're trying to unpack. So try to do more listening than forming opinions based on that lens, and try to grow and learn through other people's, other religions, other foods, other cultures. And because I've always been fortunate, that is probably my privilege where, like when I was in Africa for a month, I actually frowned upon seeing Coca-Cola. I go, I didn't come to Africa to see Coca-Cola. I want to go into the villages. And I did. And I got to see how the Maasai lived and how their community functioned. And to me, that was one of the highlights of my life. Like, because without the Western push, the colonized push, right? So it was, understanding and respecting and learning and growing from that lens. And like, why do they have like thorn bushes all the way around their village? Well, it was their way. They aren't going and shooting wolves because they're trying to protect their cattle, because they're just too fucking lazy to like really protect their cattle as they do in the States. That's money. So I want to go shoot a wolf, which was my experience coming back to the States after that, when the wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone. And I'm sitting there going like, these people don't have guns. They don't have modern weaponry, but they can protect their livestock from a hell of a lot more abundant wildlife over there and predators with thorn bushes. Okay. But we can't do that here. Like, so like, this is where we learn, when we sit and we learn and we go, okay, so I got to kind of unpack what we're doing here because that's harmful. And I got to try to learn what they're doing, because at the time they were one of the last nomadic tribes in Africa when I was there. And, it pained me to see the infection that I saw starting to creep in. And that was 30 years ago, so,
yeah, I think the key, I've heard this recently. It was something like until you have deconstructed one entire worldview, you don't even have the opportunity to learn.
Yeah.
Because we are taught, like, and any child raised in any family, in any culture, like, they're like, this is how we human, this is how it is. And you believe that. And that might be in a religious cult. It might be in a racist community, right? And that child is going to grow up and just believe it until and unless you go out of your way and start questioning everything that's going to be true. And the only way you're going to have that doubt is by talking to people outside of that way of life. whether that's like geographically traveling, whether it's just going into another community, another culture. Like we have to have that like beginner's mind to say, oh, people do things differently. And I think a lot of times that triggers a kind of fear. I'm uncomfortable. I don't like it. Therefore, it's bad. And my way is better. And if that's,
Yes.
there's one
So that, but
teaching that I
that's where
can
we
leave.
say, but that's where we
Yeah.
say, look, stop. I would say, stop, pause, take a breath, see the trigger for what it is,
Mm.
and what is the real issue? Because that's just the trigger. The trigger just saying, hey, stop. There's something here that has to be addressed. Okay.
Yeah.
And most likely you'll find out has nothing to do with what the actual trigger is. It's something else that's in here.
Right.
And
Mm.
you know, and I always find like just start, if you don't even know where to begin, just start questioning, you know, am I, I had a conversation once, this was during the pandemic, and I went to go get something for my car, and we had masks on, and one of the guys came out, he goes, he couldn't, he didn't, he read lips because he was deaf, and he asked me to pull my mask down. And so we were out in my car, and so I asked him, like, so can I ask you a question of how you lost your hearing? Because he was awfully young, he was in his 20s, and he kind of looked at me, and I immediately knew, go, okay, he's seeing this white girl, probably from like this upper middle class town, and I get it. And so I kind of shared a stupid little thing I did when I was a teenager, and I said, "Yep, I almost got arrested like when I was 16 because I shot bottle rockets off at my neighbor's house because we hated them, and we weren't thinking anything of it, but one got stuck in the shingles and started burning, And I go, like, did you do anything stupid like that? Like, like just to kind of like ease in the conversation. And he said a gunshot blew his eardrum out, is what happened. And so his mom was a single mother from another country in Africa. And so, and he goes, but I have a different life now. He goes, but I am deaf in that ear, so I have to read lips. And but he says my life is different now. And so, and we were talking just about different things, and just listening, you get to learn about somebody. And so I invited him over if he wanted to come visit my office, and offered him a few things. And when he found out the location of it, he was like, well, I have a very good relationship with the police department in this town. He goes, but in that town, all they have to do is look at me and I'll be pulled over. And that broke my heart. So this is where, like, especially those are us, it's like we have to listen to that, because you don't know what it looks like until you listen to those voices.
Mm.
And you don't realize, because this is what my privilege was, even though I have experienced systemic oppression, and I have even experienced it, because it's like mental illness is used as a cop out every time in family
Mm.
court with domestic
Mm.
violence. Instead
Yeah.
of addressing, look, I wouldn't be reacting this way if the courts would just stop the abuse. Stop the abuse, and she wouldn't be acting so erratic. Like, it's
Right.
that simple, right? But no,
Hmm.
you're putting on this thing, and then he's making money on it, and the lawyers are making money on it. The reunification camps are legally trafficking our kids. It's modern day legalized trafficking. And so it's like, you don't know what you don't know until you put
Hmm.
yourself out there. And then when you start unpacking some of those colonizer lens and those cultural conditioning, some of that church indoctrination, um, you might surprise yourself at what happens to your illness, what happens to your mental health, what happens to, your autoimmune disease. And when you start reclaiming all those parts of you, and I can only speak as a white person, so I can't speak to others, but I know from like when we did the pilgrimage, that's what we did, and the duality, there was the pain. I mean, yeah, there was a lot of toxic capitalist colonizer, new age spiritual people. In one year, I saw a lot of desecration on sites that are 6,000 years old, that the British didn't touch, the Vikings didn't touch, the
Mm.
Norse didn't touch, the Spaniards didn't touch, but because they understood what happened if you messed with the spirits of those lands. But new age colonizer or neo-colonizer spiritual folks go up there and think it's cool to dig in a 6,000-year-old grave to mine crystals, is thinks that that's okay. It is not. And the level of desecration I saw in 1 year was mind-boggling. And so here we are holding the magic and the anger and the rage simultaneously. And you know what? It's okay. It's okay to have both. It's okay to be angry for like Gaza and for what's happening. And it's okay to be thankful for the life that you have. As
Mm.
long as you're finding a purpose, as long as you're doing the work, we're not always going to know the answers. But I always say, just like there's microaggressions, there's also micro things that you can do. There's
Mhm,
simple little things that
mhm,
you can do to shift those paradigms for a healthier life. Because when you're doing it for yourself, you're doing it for the home, you're also doing it in the micros for society, for a great mother, right?
mm,
And when we
mm.
show up in proper relationship and we learn what that looks like again, then guess what? Those power structures lose their power. That's why they're so fucking afraid right now. They're afraid.
Mm, mhm,
But this is where we
mhm.
have to unify. This is where this is the spiritual medicine. The earth is saying, look, hear me, hear me. I want to be part of this. I want to be part of this. Remember,
Mm,
the earth is within inside of us, the water, the fire, the air, right?
mm,
And
mhm.
nothing is born in the light. So all those people that go, everything is love and light, blah, blah, nothing, zero. You don't birth a child, you don't birth a plant, you don't birth an animal. Nothing is born in the light. It is always done in the darkness. That's where the seeds germinate. That's where
Mm,
we grow.
mhm.
I think if we remember
Absolutely.
that, right? I mean, that's going back to everything you just said about reconnecting. If you're triggered, you need to get off these devices, get off of the stories, get into let the trees talk to you, let the water talk to you, let the
Mhm,
birds talk
mhm.
to you. And you
Yeah.
know what? Don't go into the conditioning of, well, this is crazy, this is not, this is silly.
Yeah.
And they want us to talk to them. They have things, and if you show up in proper relationship, they will start talking back.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think, like, overall, we have this culture that's so obsessed with comfort and convenience that anything that someone doesn't understand or that is remotely uncomfortable becomes demonized. And we use this shortcut of our brain, it's all good or it's all bad, right? There's not a lot of room for nuance, critical thinking, contradiction, both and in this society. Everything is wants to be just deemed good or bad, right or wrong. This is the way, this is not the way. And I think that's why people end up so separated and segregated. Because if everyone was willing to sit in a little bit of that discomfort and question it and wonder about it and endure it, like that's the only way that it's going to become comfortable. Like I was visiting a friend, she has a 1-year-old baby, and the baby doesn't like his feet on the grass, right? He's like, oh, that feels weird. But she every day she puts his feet on the grass a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, because it is uncomfortable, right? He's a city baby. This is new. But if you just avoid what's uncomfortable, it's never going to become more comfortable. Like the only way is to lean into that discomfort with safety, with love and support. But that's the only way that this little boy is going to end up, feeling more comfortable having his feet on the grass. Like you have to endure something that's a little scary and you don't understand and you don't know what it is. But if people around you are like, you're safe, we got you, you're okay, that's how you grow your comfort zone. And same with like
That's
going
how
to
you
therapy,
heal. But that's how
that
you
going to
heal,
healing. There's
right?
no easy peasy, comfortable, like, all these promises of love and light. Like you will not get to the other side without
That's just
sitting
another addiction. That's
in
just
some
another addiction
discomfort.
and bypassing, like, it's
Hmm.
not fixing anything. And I think if you really, I think most people are getting, the old saying that I was always taught, and this is when I was in corporate, it's when you get sick and tired of being sick and tired. And when you're at that point of being sick and tired of being sick and tired of the same old thing, the same old thing, the same old thing, and it really comes down to what are you willing to change?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Like it reminds me of just going to the gym, right? It's not always fun. You don't always want to go. Like most of the time, maybe you don't. But then when you start to see yourself getting stronger, see your body change, feel how good you feel after exercising, like that's the reason why. And so you have to be willing to say, this might not be what I want, what I desire to do, what's easy and comfortable in the moment, but it's for the sake of bringing myself to a different place. Like you have, what is it? You only get something different, but to get something different, you have to do something you've never done. Like there's no way if you keep doing the same thing that you're going to just get into a different relationship, a different body, a different part of the country, different profession. Like you are going to have to endure some discomfort, some challenge, some failure, some sorrow, some grief, some, hesitation. And then that's how you become good at something, right? Like no one is just,
Yeah, nothing grows in the light. Everything
yeah,
grows in the darkness. I mean, and I mean that's
yeah.
just the way it is. So I got one final question before we end is what would be like what would be the final thing you want people to know? Like what we got a lot of things happening in this country. The mental health that's happening in this country is off the rocker. The stress, people's fear, people's phobia, and you're coming at it from a different lens of seeing it through a decolonized lens, coming at it from a mental health, understanding those wounds, also understanding where we are even politically, right? So, what would be one thing you would say to give somebody hope or a direction that they kind of
Hmm.
need as we kind of wrap everything up? What would be the medicine you want to offer them?
I definitely think becoming part of a group, a circle, a team of people that are not just like yourself is the number one thing that you can do. Even if you just go and you listen, even if it's a group therapy, even if it's a religious service that's not one you're familiar with, but practice connecting with people on that human level. Practicing, but make sure that you're interacting with people that are different, and again, remembering that everyone is different sometimes because that's all the information they've been given and they don't know that what they don't know. And just really trying to relate to people as people, right? Like you go, like when I was at this ecstatic dance class, like I don't know everyone's politics. And that moment, we are just all humans dancing to the beat on the dance floor. It felt amazing. We don't all agree on things, we don't all walk the same life, but finding a way to be in connection with people that are different and other than yourself and just sharing like this human experience. We don't know at what moment or what day any of us is going to leave. And so this obsession with being right or wrong or us and them, that is the biggest sickness that I see afflicting this world. And so finding a way to become part of something greater than yourselves with people that are different than yourself and making some kind of difference, even if it's for one plant, one being, one animal. I think that that's where we can really derive hope. It's not even necessarily like we're going to win or we're going to lose, but it doesn't mean that we
One
don't
step.
try.
It's
One
one
step
step.
every day.
It's one step, and it's shifting our lens. How would if somebody wanted to work with you would be the best way for them to find you?
Sure. Yeah. You can look me up on psychologytoday.com. It's Lolly B, LOLLYBE. You can look me up on Instagram, Lolly B Empowerment. I'm on Facebook as well. I'm pretty outward facing. I'm on TikTok at Lolly B Free. So you can follow me at any of the socials, and then you can email me at Lolly B Empowerment. So it's a BE empowerment, so two E's at gmail.com. I'm doing one on one right now, but you can get on the list for upcoming groups and courses. But yeah, I would love to hear from folks that are tuning in here. Thank you so much for this space and this great conversation. And just looking forward to connecting with people other than myself, different than myself. Thank
Well, I,
you.
I really appreciate your voice, your lens, and everything else. Your voice is hugely important, both in healthcare as well as overall health with our sick society that we have going on. And you bring in a lot of valuable information that I think your medicine's big. So I'm glad you're here. Thank you, Lolly.
Thank
Until
you.
next time. And by the way, make sure you follow, like, become a Patreon subscriber. Patreon helps support our domestic violence initiatives. And you can look it up. Links are in the description below. Have a great day, everybody. Until next time on Triggers and Spiritual Medicine. I'm Laura. I'm your hostess.